Not a complicated question. Does Donald Trump appear anywhere in the Epstein files?
I didn't say it was a complicated question. I just didn't hear you, so my apologies. We have released where President Trump's name's in the Epstein files and everybody else, and all credible information that we are legally allowed to release has been released. Any allegations that I'm a part of a cover-up to protect child sexual trafficking and victims of human trafficking and sexual crimes is patently and categorically false. I just told you I'm not going to release downloaded porn.
I'm not asking about that. Fine. I'm asking about all the other files.
What other videos? Tell me. Tell me.
On Capitol Hill, in a hearing room where every microphone sounded like a trapdoor, Representative Daniel Goldman put one question on the table that hit like a brick through glass. Mr. Patel, does Donald Trump appear anywhere in the Epstein files? And right there, folks, the room changed. Because this was not some sleepy committee exchange about paperwork, procedure, or agency housekeeping. This was Kash Patel, the FBI director, being pressed on Jeffrey Epstein's files, Donald Trump's name, sealed records, victim evidence, and the one thing Washington hates more than accountability, a straight yes or no answer. So let's be real. You either believe the American people deserve the full truth about the Epstein network, or you believe powerful names should stay buried behind legal fog, bureaucratic word games, and phrases like, as much as legally allowed. Goldman did not stroll into that hearing asking a casual question. He came in like a prosecutor walking toward the witness stand with a folder already open, because the first issue was simple. Does Donald Trump's name appear in the Epstein files, yes or no? Patel first said he did not hear the question, and maybe that is true, but come on, man, when the question is that direct, every second of delay becomes part of the drama.
And you're talking, and I said that's 6E, and I said there was others, and I'm answering that. There are sealed court order documents. There are protective orders.
They are unsealed as part of discovery given to Ghislaine Maxwell. They are no longer sealed.
That's just not true. We can argue about it all you want.
Okay, well, you agree that there are, so your testimony here is that the reason why you are not releasing all of the videos that you have acknowledged, there are so many, and that the FBI spent thousands of hours of reviewing, the photographs, the photographs that you have. You're saying that you're not releasing those because there's a court order requiring them to be sealed? Is that your testimony?
Never said that about the videos. On the totality of the videos, of the thousands of images that were seized pursuant to the search warrant executed at the time, the overwhelming majority of that video is pornographic material that was downloaded from the internet and child sexual abuse material. We will never release that.
Well, as you should not release the victims. But if there are videos that relate to others who Epstein trafficked to, such as maybe Prince Andrew, or photographs, that you have total control to release.
Yes, and if it exists...
And so why haven't you released it?
Why are you supposing that that is a fact when in fact it is false?
Then Patel said the FBI had released where President Trump's name appears, along with everyone else, and that all credible information legally allowed to be released had been released. That phrase sounds responsible until Goldman started pulling it apart piece by piece. Here's the thing. Goldman was not asking Patel to release victim names, child sexual abuse material, or anything that would violate basic decency. Goldman was asking what specific law, what specific court order, what specific protective order actually blocks the public from seeing the rest. That is where the hearing shifted from political theater into prosecutorial combat. Goldman raised Rule 6E, grand jury secrecy, sealed search warrant material, protective orders, witness interviews, FBI 302s, videos, photographs, and the difference between what is truly illegal to release and what officials simply do not want to touch. Patel kept returning to the same defense. The FBI released what it legally could, but Goldman's point was sharper than that. He was saying, no kidding, if the government can go back to court for grand jury material, why not go back for witness statements, records, and files that might expose who else moved through Epstein's world? And then came the moral explosion. Goldman accused Patel of hiding the Epstein files and being part of a cover-up. Patel denied it categorically, saying any claim that he was protecting child sex trafficking or human trafficking was false. But the damage was already done because the real question was hanging over that room like smoke after a fire. If the files are clean, if the process is honest, if the FBI has nothing left that matters, why does every answer sound like another locked door? Now, this is where Goldman stopped playing the polite congressional game and started cutting into the answer like a prosecutor who already knew where the weak seam was. Because Patel's defense sounded simple on the surface, we released everything we are legally allowed to release. That sounds clean. That sounds official. That sounds like the kind of sentence an agency head gives when he wants the room to move on. But Goldman did not move on, and that is exactly why this moment matters. He asked the only follow-up that matters in a case this poisoned by secrecy, legally blocked by what exactly?
None of the videos relate to anything relevant to the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking ring?
Every single video that we have collected pursuant to the prior search warrants has been examined for the last 10 years. And every single video has been utilized for whatever prosecutions were able to be legally brought.
I'm not asking about prosecutions. I'm asking about why you aren't releasing the full Epstein files, including the names of people who were involved in the sex ring that you promised to do before you became FBI director.
I just told you, I'm not going to release downloaded porn of
I'm
children
not asking
on the
about
internet.
that. Fine. I'm asking about all the other files.
What other videos? Tell me. Tell me.
That's what I'm asking.
Tell me.
You're saying there are no videos that would be relevant to anyone else involved in the Jeffrey Epstein sex ring.
Pursuant to Mr. Acosta's collection of information based on the search warrants. That's all we have in our
I
possession.
understand. And I'm asking you, that stuff.
That's all we got.
I'm not asking all you got. I'm asking you, in that stuff, there's nothing that's related to any other any other people engaged with Epstein in underage sex.
That's correct. To my knowledge, no.
Okay. Let's talk about the witness interviews. 302s of witness interviews.
Goldman pointed to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E, the rule that protects grand jury material from public disclosure. That is a real legal barrier, and nobody serious should pretend otherwise. Grand jury testimony is not supposed to be dumped into the street because a committee member wants a headline, and Goldman knew that because he said it out loud. But then he did something Patel clearly did not want to sit inside for too long. Goldman separated grand jury secrecy from everything else. He was saying, fine, Rule 6E is one box, but what about the other boxes? What about search warrant materials? What about photographs? What about videos? What about FBI 302 witness interviews, the written summaries agents create after interviewing witnesses? What about the records that are not victim identifying, not child sexual abuse material, not downloaded pornography, and not grand jury testimony? That is the pressure point, right there. Because Patel kept reaching for the broad umbrella of court orders and protective orders, while Goldman kept asking for the actual rein. Goldman's argument was not that the FBI should release illegal material. Goldman's argument was that the FBI should stop using illegal material as a shield against questions about legal material. And come on, that distinction matters. If a bank robber hides in a library, the police do not burn down every book and say, sorry, the whole building is evidence. The same logic applies here. If some videos are downloaded pornography, if some files contain child sexual abuse material, if some names belong to victims who must never be exposed, then yes, protect those files, redact those names, lock down that material forever. But do not take the existence of protected evidence and use it to fog up the entire Epstein universe. That was Goldman's point, and Patel's answers gave the moment its heat. Patel said the overwhelming majority of the video material was pornography downloaded from the internet and child sexual abuse material. He said the FBI would never release that. Good. Nobody with a conscience wants that released. But Goldman immediately narrowed the question again. What about videos or photographs related to other people Epstein trafficked victims to? Maybe Prince Andrew. Maybe others. Material that could be released if redacted properly, and if it exists. Patel pushed back and asked why Goldman was supposing that was a fact when, according to Patel, it was false. Then Patel went even further, saying every video collected under those prior search warrants had been examined for years and used for whatever prosecutions could be legally brought. But that answer slides away from the question. Goldman was not asking whether prosecutors used evidence in past prosecutions. He was asking whether the public has been shown the files that explain the network. Those are not the same question.
Those are not subject to the court order. Those are not subject to any fictional sealed order for a search warrant. Why aren't you releasing those with the redacted names of the victims?
We are releasing as much as legally allowed. That's why we went back to the courts.
How is that not legally allowed?
Sir, do you know how court orders work? Do you know how protective orders
Actually,
work? Do you know how
Mr.
sealing
Patel,
orders
I was
work?
a real prosecutor for 10 years. I know exactly how
so I was a
court
fake one?
orders. And I want to understand what the court order prevents you from releasing witness statements that the FBI took.
You should know that as a real prosecutor, when the court hand downs a protective order and a motion to seal, the material is sealed unless
So
that
your
judge
testimony
waives
here
it.
is that all of those witness statements are under a court order, a protective order.
We are providing everything we can legally provide.
No, that's not my
Congress has
question.
sent us a
My
subpoena.
question is, why are those witness statements that are not grand jury testimony, that if they were under a protective order are no longer under a protective order, why are they not being released?
How are they not under a protective
Why
order?
are you not going to the court like you did for the grand jury testimony to unseal those records?
The DOJ did go to the court.
No, not on those records. Why aren't you going? You just went on grand jury.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
You are hiding the Epstein files,
Time
Mr.
of the
Patel.
gentleman has expired.
You are part of the cover-up.
Can I respond?
You sure can.
Any allegations that I'm a part of a cover-up to protect child sexual trafficking and victims of human trafficking and sexual crimes is patently and categorically false.
A prosecutor can use a narrow slice of evidence to prove a charge in court and still leave the public with no full map of who was involved, who was named, who was interviewed, who was protected, who was ignored, and who somehow walked away untouched. That is why Goldman moved to the witness interviews, the 302s, because those are different from grand jury testimony. He asked why witness statements could not be released with victim names redacted. Patel answered again that the FBI was releasing as much as legally allowed. And there it was, the loop. Ask about specific records, get a general answer. Ask about a legal category, get a phrase. Ask why the DOJ does not go back to court for these records the way it did on grand jury material, and suddenly the clock becomes very convenient. Let's be honest, that is the part that makes people angry. Not because every file should be thrown online with no review. Not because victims should be exposed. Not because procedure does not matter. People get angry because Washington has a habit of becoming very precise when it wants to punish ordinary citizens and very vague when powerful names are trapped inside the same paperwork. That is the moral contradiction burning underneath this whole exchange. Goldman was pressing Patel on documents, but the real witness in that room was public trust. And public trust was sitting there bruised, tired, and asking the same question millions of Americans have asked for years. How does a man like Jeffrey Epstein build a network that touches royalty, billionaires, politicians, financiers, celebrities, and institutions, and yet somehow the full truth always seems to stop right before it reaches the top shelf? Patel may believe his answer is legally correct. He may believe the FBI has done everything it can. But Goldman exposed the deeper problem. When the government says, trust us in a case built on secrets, victims, sealed records, and powerful associates, trust us is not enough. Not anymore. Now watch the contradiction, because this is where the hearing stopped being about one answer and became about the architecture of avoidance. Goldman was not claiming that every document could be released tomorrow morning with no redactions, no review, no legal process, and no concern for victims. He was asking why the government keeps treating the Epstein files like one giant locked box when everyone in that room knows the box is actually made of separate compartments. Grand jury material is one compartment, victim identities are another compartment, child sexual abuse material is another, internet pornography is another, search warrant evidence is another, witness interviews are another, and records involving powerful third parties are yet another. So when Patel kept saying, we released what we legally could, Goldman's pressure was basically this: stop giving America one big answer for 6 different categories of evidence. And that is a fair demand, because in any serious investigation, categories matter. If a prosecutor walks into court and says, Your Honor, all evidence is protected, the judge does not just nod along like, well, that sounds fancy. The judge asks what evidence, under what rule, under what order, for what reason, with what redactions, and whether a less restrictive option exists. That is basic legal thinking, and Goldman was trying to force that thinking into the open. Patel, meanwhile, kept answering from the institutional side, where the safest sentence is always the broadest sentence, because broad answers protect agencies from exposure, criticism, and future contradictions. But broad answers do not heal public distrust, and in the Epstein case, they actually make it worse. Here's the thing, folks. The public is not suspicious because one document is sealed. The public is suspicious because every time the story reaches the names, the access, the wealthy circles, the private flights, the elite friendships, and the people who were close enough to Epstein to matter, suddenly the language becomes softer, slower, and more legalistic. That does not automatically prove a cover-up, and nobody honest should say it does. But it absolutely creates the appearance of a system protecting itself first and explaining itself second. And when the subject is Jeffrey Epstein, human trafficking, underage victims, and powerful men moving through the same orbit, appearance is not some minor public relations problem. Appearance becomes part of the moral injury. Goldman's strongest move was bringing up the FBI 302 witness interviews, because that forced the issue away from the most extreme material and toward ordinary investigative records. He was essentially asking if these are summaries of witness interviews, and if victim names can be redacted, and if they are not grand jury testimony, then what exactly prevents release? Patel responded with court orders and protective orders, but Goldman challenged whether those orders actually covered all of that material in the way Patel implied. That is not a small disagreement. That is the difference between a lawful barrier and a convenient wall. And let's be real. Americans have seen enough convenient walls to know when one starts looking a little too polished. The deeper logic here is brutal. Patel's answer depends on the public accepting that the FBI's legal judgment is complete, final, and sufficient. Goldman's challenge depends on the opposite idea, that when public trust has collapsed, the government has to show its work, not expose victims, not dump illegal material, not violate court orders, show the work. Explain what is sealed, explain why it is sealed, explain what can be redacted, explain what can be petitioned, explain what has already been reviewed, and explain why certain files are still sitting in darkness. That is not extremism. That is accountability with a spine. And this is where the moral scene becomes unavoidable. Because behind every phrase like protective order and legally allowed, there are real victims who were abused, trafficked, ignored, questioned, doubted, and then forced to watch the most powerful institutions in the country argue over paperwork, while the people connected to Epstein's world keep living behind gates, lawyers, foundations, and carefully written statements. That is why Goldman's final accusation landed so hard, even if Patel denied it with force. When Goldman said, "You are hiding the Epstein files," he was not just throwing a partisan grenade. He was voicing the suspicion that has been sitting in the American bloodstream for years. And Patel's denial, while intense, still did not answer the core emotional question. Are the victims being protected, or are powerful people being protected in the victim's name? That is the line this hearing forced into daylight. And no, that line does not belong to Democrats or Republicans alone. It cuts through every institution that ever promised transparency and then delivered a locked cabinet. It cuts through every politician who campaigned on truth and then discovered legal complexity the moment the files got uncomfortable. It cuts through every agency that says the public should be patient, while refusing to give the public enough detail to know whether patience is wisdom or surrender. Because if the Epstein files still contain nothing of public consequence, then say that clearly category by category, record by record, with the legal basis attached. But if they do contain names, interviews, leads, references, communications, or evidence that could show who enabled Epstein's machine, then the American people do not need another slogan about legality. They need a process that looks less like damage control and more like justice. And this is the lesson, folks. A republic does not survive on slogans about transparency. It survives when powerful institutions prove transparency in the ugliest cases, the hardest cases, the cases where the names are famous. The lawyers are expensive, and the public pressure is not convenient for anybody in charge. That is why this Goldman versus Patel exchange matters beyond one hearing, beyond one headline, beyond whether you like Daniel Goldman, Kash Patel, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, or any other name orbiting the Epstein scandal. At the center of this is a simple moral test. When victims are involved, does the system protect the wounded, or does it protect the powerful while using the wounded as the excuse? That is the question no agency statement can dodge forever. Personally, I think this is where Americans have every right to be impatient. Not reckless, not careless, not demanding the release of victim identities or illegal material, but deeply impatient with vague answers dressed up as legal virtue. Because when the government wants to explain why a normal person is in trouble, suddenly every detail becomes public, every date matters, every receipt gets stacked, every technicality becomes a weapon. But when the trail points upward toward elite circles, political networks, billionaire access, and protected reputations, somehow the same government starts speaking in fog. And give me a break, people notice that. They notice when "we cannot release that" becomes the end of the discussion instead of the beginning of a real explanation. They notice when officials say "court order" without clearly walking through which order, which record, which category, and which possible path to unseal or redact. They notice when victims ask to be heard, and powerful people still get smoother treatment than the people who suffered. So the solution is not chaos. The solution is a real public accounting. List the categories, separate the protected material from the releasable material, petition the court where needed, redact victims completely, preserve illegal evidence securely, and stop pretending one broad legal phrase can carry the weight of a national trauma. That is my bottom line. This is not about feeding conspiracy theories. This is about starving institutional arrogance. Because if the Epstein files truly reveal nothing more, then prove it with process. And if they reveal more than the public has been told, then stop hiding behind procedure and start acting like justice means the same thing when the names are powerful. So here's the question. If ordinary Americans are expected to trust the system, when will the system finally trust ordinary Americans with the truth? If this hearing told you something about power, secrecy, and accountability, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video, and subscribe for more breakdowns that do not flinch when Washington starts sweating.